Is tourism always good for places?
It can be good for a place because it brings a lot of money and more people get jobs. But if it relies too much on tourism, then it will turn into a very commercial place like Venice.
Should we all travel to other countries?
I think we should travel as much as possible because we can experience different cultures around the world and try different foods and meet different people. And it is something that you cannot learn from a book or television.
Are you a tourist or a traveller?
I consider myself as a traveller because I'm here to study in Australia. I'm not just coming over for a holiday.
What do you think about ecotourism?
What do you mean by ecotourism?
Ecotourism is tourism that is sensitive to the environment.
I believe that ecotourism can be a good thing because especially now, environmental friendly is a big trend now. And after people experiencing the wildlife, they might appreciate it more.
Is it better to take one long holiday or several short ones?
It's hard to say because if you take a long trip, you can learn more about the culture of a place. And if you take several short trips, you can go to more different places and see a bit more. So if you're really interested in one place or a culture, then you should spend more time in that place. Whereas if you just want to see one thing from a country, then you just take a short holiday. So I think a long holiday and short holiday, a mix of them would be perfect.
Here is Lester giving his response to some questions in part 3 of the IELTS speaking. So here in this question about tourism, he gives quite a long answer, and he organizes his answer quite well. He starts off by giving kind of like a non-answer. It's hard to say, and that's fine. Things are not always black and white. Sometimes it's difficult to just say yes or no or give a definitive answer. But right after that, he gives a reason. And then he compares the two options, making several shorter trips and talking about a longer trip. And he compares the two by using the word whereas. So if you're really interested in one place or a culture, then you should spend more time in that place, whereas. So he uses whereas to show contrast, how the two ideas are different. And then he gives almost like a little conclusion at the end. So I think a long holiday and a short holiday, a mix of them would be perfect. The word order is not quite right, but overall the organization is quite good. Now he does repeat himself a little bit. He says, especially now, environmentally friendly is a big trend now. So this repetition with now appearing twice. As for referencing, in the question, is tourism always good for places? Lester uses the word it quite a few times in his response. He says it can be good for a place because it brings a lot of money and more people get jobs. But if it relies too much on tourism, then it will turn into a very commercial place like Venice. So we have all these pronouns, it, but they don't refer to the same thing. So it could be a little bit confusing to know what the it refers to. So instead of saying, but if it relies too much on tourism, Lester could have said, but if a place or if a city or if a country relies too much on tourism, then it would be certain what the subject of this sentence is. Now, as for vocabulary, Lester uses words quite accurately. There aren't too many inaccuracies. He uses this phrase commercial place. I think that's a good way to describe a place. But other than that, And here we have environmentally friendly. Environmentally friendly is quite good. So it's quite accurate, but we don't see those less commonly used phrases that we really need to see for a really good score for vocabulary. Now, as far as grammatical range and accuracy goes, in this particular part 3, the candidate has to give opinions in the question, should we travel to other countries? And is tourism always good for places? And do you have any views about ecotourism? These 3 questions all require you to give an opinion. And you have to explain your position. In this question, are you a tourist or a traveler? And in the question, is it better to take one long holiday or several short ones? You have to compare the 2. Okay, and Lester does this quite well. He uses simple sentences. For example, so I think a long holiday and a short holiday, a mix of them would be perfect. These 2 sentences should rather be joined together to make the response more coherent. Lester doesn't do that. But for compound sentences, he does quite well, although he tends to use the word and too often, as we saw in part 2. So for example, he says, I think we should travel as much as possible because we can experience different cultures around the world and try different foods and meet different people. It's very fond of the word and, but it does become a little repetitive. Here's another example. I think we should travel as much as possible because we can experience different cultures around the world and try different foods and meet different people, and it is something that you cannot learn from a book or television. Okay, let's move on to more complex sentences. He uses the word because also, and if, just like we saw in part 2. So because Lester uses these if and because sentences so often, we're starting to see a pattern. So he uses complex sentences, but the variety is kind of limited, since there are only really 2 types, because and if. The accuracy is quite good, although he does occasionally make mistakes. For example, and after people experiencing the wildlife, they might appreciate it more. So here, experiencing is used when instead he should have said, and after people experience the wildlife, they might appreciate it more. But this mistake in Lester's speaking is perhaps not systematic. It could be a mistake that just is a slip. It's just a mistake. It's not a mistake that he will repeat again and again. Possibly, we don't know, because we only saw him make the mistake once. So that's an example of a non-systematic error. It's an error that is only an error that only happens once. Systematic errors are where you always make the same kind of mistake in a particular sentence pattern.